All right, last panel of the day, and we're going to do it a little bit differently and just answer questions, have a conversation. So those of us who have been together the last 2 days, you know, I'm Ruthie Hanchett. I am an adjunct professor here, and I am so honored by all of you joining our panel today because we are going to share a stage with some of the people that are personal mentors to me, heroes, that I have learned so much from because of your dedication to our children and the way that you've dedicated your lives to serving them. And so I'm going to start by introducing our panel. The first on my left is Beverly Berryman. She is one of the 5 publicly elected trustees of the Fullerton School District, which is a kindergarten through 8th grade district. And over the years, Trustee Berryman has served in nearly every capacity as a school volunteer can do, right? From the classroom to your local PTA, to the City of Fullerton PTA President, Parent Teacher Association, to currently the Director of Advocacy for Orange County's 4th District PTA. And professionally, she also serves through as the Community Engagement Director at Crittenton Services for Children and Families, where she works tirelessly to engage the larger community to support vulnerable children and youth through volunteering, donating, and through service. So thank you, Bev, for being here. And then next we have Dr. Sonja Yamas, and we are meeting for the first time here at the panel, and I'm so grateful for you being here. Dr. Yamas is the Assistant Superintendent for K through 12 Schools Performance and Culture at Santa Ana Unified School District. So she serves approximately 50,000 students, K through 12. Oversees a dynamic team responsible for leading district-wide initiatives such as our multi-tiered systems of support and PBIS, positive behavior interventions and support, to develop positive school climates and implement progressive school discipline and interventions. And you're also a licensed clinical social worker. I'm sure that comes in handy. And then to her left, we have Dr. Ramon Miramontes, my neighbor and friend, who is a superintendent of the Buena Park School District, which is a K through 8th. And Dr. Miramontes has more than 30 years of experience in public education, serving as a classroom teacher, middle school, school assistant principal, elementary and K through 8 principal, and then director of personnel at Norwalk La Mirada Unified and Los Angeles County Office of Education. So he was named the 2021 Superintendent of the Year by the California Association of Latino Superintendents and Administrators, yes, for demonstrating exceptional leadership in advancing equity and success for Latino students and their families. And this was during the pandemic year. And we heard yesterday about the new pilot program, the Focus program, about alerting when kids need extra help and care. That was from Buena Park, Dr. Miramontes' community. And then finally, we have Dr. Jeff Hittenberger, who is also a professor here at Vanguard University in our education graduate program with this focus on single subject teaching credential. And Jeff's experience in education includes teaching in the classroom in K through 12 schools, working with Santa Ana Unified School District, where he was a mentor teacher and a master teacher. Yes, you guys have a connection there. And he recently served 8 years as the Chief Academic Officer for the Orange County Department of Education, our co-host for this conference this year. And he oversaw and facilitated teacher professional learning for more than 20,000 teachers in the 27 school districts in Orange County. So we have a lot of expertise and a lot of wisdom here. And we are so grateful that you're here to guide us in this conversation, as we are going to be discussing how are all of our kids doing and what is the role of public education in supporting them. So I want to just start with the COVID question. We know that over the last 2 years, COVID-19 has created all kinds of changes for our kids. We know that standardized testing has been waived during those 2 years, it's beginning again, but we've heard a lot about learning loss, kind of the challenges our kids are facing. As a parent, we see the struggle they've gone through and the stress that it's caused our families and our kids. So I want to ask, how are our kids doing? And what are our schools doing well to respond to those challenges? So I'll start with Dr. Yamas, if you want to share with us.
Sure, thank you, Ruthie. So prior to the pandemic, we had already instituted a social emotional learning assessment for our students. And the reason that was important is we were able to then maintain that during the pandemic. It was a series of questions, check-in questions, and we actually created then a three-part assessment series when we moved into the pandemic, because we still wanted to see how were our students doing. Were they feeling anxious, depressed, sad? Some basic questions, and made it grade level appropriate. So we've captured that data. And I think one of the judges mentioned it's like the use of data. Well, I am slightly a data geek, but in order to really maximize resources in a school district, it's really important for us to understand what are the specific needs and then how to deliver those resources. So when we maintained that assessment during that pandemic, it really gave us a real pulse of where our students were. Many of it early on was basic needs, hotspots, basic needs such as food, shelter. Many of our families had been going through evictions as well because of lost wages due to the pandemic. So Santa Ana was hit tremendously. As a community, we pulled together and really refined our allocation of resources across the district. But I really found that many of our decisions were data-driven. So we were looking, we have a data hub, we were geo-mapping data as far as where our students were, as far as where we needed to diligently allocate those resources. But we also incorporated a lot of modules related to counseling, social workers. We had a mental health helpline for our students that we kept open, and we had office after hours. So we started at 7:30 in the morning. That hotline did not end until 10 p.m. And then we gave a series of mental health resources and developed a Google site. So that way there was constantly communication. In addition, we were doing food deliveries. We were going to the homes. We have grandparents that are raising children in our community. So we were in buses delivering food, just allocating whatever the resources were necessary to ensure that our students were well during the pandemic. So are they okay? They're still struggling, but they have a whole city of support and district that is by their side. And I'm very appreciative of my colleagues and our Board of Education and the cabinet I serve on for really putting students first.
Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Miramontes, you want to share what's going on in Buena Park? You should slide it up in it.
Thank you. Unlike Santa Ana, Buena Park is a small district. It's got about 4,000 students, but we did a lot of the same things. We looked at our data, right? We had to shift all our resources to the needs within the community. Hotspots, we were already a one-to-one district with iPads for all our students. The difference was they weren't taking them home. So they were using them at school. So the technology wasn't as difficult. What was difficult for Buena Park was we have the two sides of town, right? Where on one side of town, you've got the $2 million homes, but you come all the way down Beach Boulevard and you have students living in motels, right? And so the equity there was difficult, but we did surround ourselves with community-based organizations, nonprofits, faith-based. The Indian Temple every Sunday was out there giving food out. I mean, throughout the pandemic, they were there in numbers. Our district was, our city council members were, really unified our efforts to provide services for kids. And so that was probably the biggest thing when it came down to just getting the basic needs down, right? Then we had to go back and we were pretty good about teaching online. Our teachers felt really comfortable. We had an initiative years before that, so that felt really comfortable for switching over, but it was a little bit difficult. It was difficult for kids. I think of my family, and I had the conversation with my wife in the car, thinking, what if it was my family, that I come from a family of 7 brothers and sisters, so 8 of us. What if that were to happen during this time? So we had families that, again, lost wages. Parents weren't working or had to work. So it was the oldest brother that went to the high school that had to stay home to make sure that you were on because your teacher needed you on at a certain time and you needed. So we had to work with our families quite a bit. We also had Care Solis, which is a mental health and hotline for our school district, for anybody. And we saw a huge rise in the city of Buena Park of domestic violence. I mean, it was stressful on the entire family. So all the things we're talking about here with students, right, really affected us. Our kids are resilient. Our teachers have done a wonderful job. Our staffs have done a wonderful job, and we're getting out of it. Some of these problems were already there prior to. So Buena Park had students that were failing, right? Like the entire system, right? And so I'm glad that the university has its conference. I was here, I think, the first year, and so it's nice to bring it all back and to have it in person and to move forward, because this is something I think we need, and we need to continue to move forward. But as far as what Dr. Yamas was saying is, she is a champion. People were probably knocking on her door, right? Because I know that they have the resources, but like all of us, we had to reallocate and hit the need where it was at that time. So for Buena Park, we continue to work through this. We've adjusted our schedules. We have counselors at every elementary school, which we didn't have before. We have more psychologists. We have more nurses. So we have a lot more of the basic needs there. But at the same time, we're setting the bar high, because that's not an excuse to succeed. So the academic piece is still really important to all of us.
Trustee Berryman, I wonder if you want to share a little bit about Fullerton. I'm hearing a theme of community support and bringing people together to support our kids. I love that. And I know that happened in Fullerton too.
Right. I think when I look at it from Fullerton School District, we are a medium-sized district, 16,000, so more or less. We've done the same things, when we talk about the education community. I come from a different perspective because I'm the only one up here. It's probably not the education person, right? Probably in this whole room, you guys are all education people. I'm here as the regular, just person off the street. So I'm a school board member, so I come from the parent side of this. So I'm coming up from looking at it with a different way. Understanding that we've done the same things, the carousels, we're identifying students as they come in. All of our staff, all of our teachers take the time to figure out where our students are from TK all the way up to 8th grade, where we go to 8th grade. So all of our staff are looking at that. Our teachers are looking, where are our kids? We're identifying who is at risk, because understanding that they're coming from environments where you don't know what's happened throughout this last 2 years. You don't know how many kids have lost family members, and you don't know the trauma that they've been through. So our staff are doing those same things. I look at it as, when we talk about SEL and we talk about social emotional learning, as a parent, what does that look like? And I get that question all the time, putting on my PTA hat, is you talk about this, but what does that really mean for people? So I thought I would just kind of share that with us, because we talk about education needs has so many acronyms, right? You guys, it's like, what does that mean? When we talk about that, what it means is that at every level of education, at every grade, our teachers are sitting down with our kids and teaching them how to identify what they're feeling. Right. So it's in kindergarten, how does that make you feel? And having our students be able to be self-aware of what they're feeling and to be able to identify it and communicate it. Self-management, teaching them positive ways on how to deal with their emotions. When you're angry, when you're sad, how do you deal with that? Right. So making sure our kids are aware of that. Self-awareness, making sure that they understand how they feel and how somebody else will feel if that happens to them, and really have them think about that. And again, we're starting in kindergarten and going all the way up, and it looks different every grade level, but it's going back to that social emotional learning. Is where do our kids feel? We could talk about test scores all we want, but unless kids are feeling safe, and unless they feel comfortable in their environment, unless they're being taken care of, they can't learn. And if you can't learn, you can't test. And so those are things you really need to look at. Teaching them relationships, understanding how to communicate, knowing that when they come into a classroom, if they don't trust their instructor, if they don't trust where they're at, they're not going to learn, right? They have to feel safe. And a lot of our kids weren't feeling of the stuff that happens, the trauma, the pressure that families were under during this time. When the doors are closed, you don't see the domestic violence. You don't see what's really happening. The kids had their monitors off, right? So you didn't know what they looked like. You didn't know if they were bruised. You didn't see that stuff. So coming back and having to have our staff deal with that. How do you resolve conflict? They had a year and a half, 2 years where they didn't have to talk to anybody other than their family members, right? And they were fighting with their family, right? You just fight because that's my brother and my sister. And so you come to school and you can no longer fight. You need to really figure out, how am I going to deal with this person that's not going to unconditionally love me and have to be friends at the end of the day. So it's really teaching our kids how to get through that. And as parents, those are things our parents need help with, right? And so for us as school districts, it's how do you provide those resources to our parents so that they can do that? We have encountered, or we've embarked in this new crusade or campaign in the Fullerton School District, and it's called I See You, You Are Important, and You Matter. And I think that's what we're looking at in our school district, because our kids need to be seen. They need to feel like they're important, and they need to feel like they matter. So I think that, in addition to all those things, we've got the resources, you've got the websites. But I think that that's one thing that I'd like to add.
Thank you so much for that. Leading into my second question I had for you all was to think about, we've been hearing a lot about the impacts of trauma, right? And the way that it affects and shapes our brains. And we know teachers are learning these lessons too, and they're seeing it in their classroom. So maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Hittenberger, and ask, how are we training our teachers? How are we preparing them so that kids can get into that calm place in their brain and learn?
Thank you, Ruthie. And I just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate Bev and Sonia and Ramon and the leadership of Orange County school districts during this time has been absolutely extraordinary. Yes, clap, please. And honestly, they are on the receiving end of a lot of criticism. It's easy to be a critic, but the reality is these folks and their counterparts in other districts around Orange County have done heroic work in probably the hardest time in American education, at least the last 150 years. So I'm just deeply appreciative of you guys. And I think what you shared was so powerful. Ruthie, to the point of brain science and what we know about trauma, I feel like we are extremely fortunate that in the years preceding COVID, the emphasis on social and emotional learning became strong. And there were critics of that movement. There were people, school's about studying, reading, writing, arithmetic, stop talking about social emotional, it doesn't matter. If we had not been doing that before COVID hit, think about how much less prepared we would have been to respond to what students are experiencing. Dr. Mijares, our county superintendent of schools, launched probably 4 years ago an initiative called 1 Billion Acts of Kindness. And this kindness movement has been a huge thing in Orange County schools over the last 5 years. If it had not been that we were attending to issues of kindness and the ways in which we care for each other and how important our emotional lives are, we would have been way less prepared to deal with the kind of impacts that this has had on people. And I mean, brain science, affect precedes cognition. It's one of my favorite quotes.
Break that down for us.
Affect precedes cognition. If you're not dealing with the affective dimension, the cognitive can't do what it is meant to do. So, that's brain science. It's what social emotional learning has focused on. And it's because of that focus that we have been able to respond, I think, in ways that help students.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to chime in with what has been happening in your school district? Yeah.
Sure, we'll go this way now. So I'll go before Santana. Jeff's absolutely right. We as superintendents met every single week. Every single week we would have a 2-hour conversation about what we're doing, right? And how we're sort of tackling this, because our communities are so tied together. We are part of the Fullerton Joint High School District. Well, Bev and myself are part of the Fullerton Joint High. And what we do at one part might affect the high school students because we're a K-8 district and the high school district's 9 through 12, right? But if we pull out, they stay in, and we've got families that are separated, right? So one of the things when it came to traumas, we had the training, we were working through this, but we started to notice that we started to lose kids, right? Kids were disengaging. We started to notice that parents were driving their cars into our parking lots. These were some of the families that live on Beach Boulevard, right? So I had an idea, and we were working with the Boys and Girls Club. I sit on their board of directors, and they have a huge facility, right? And at that time, schools weren't allowed, or students weren't allowed on campus. This is COVID. Nobody knew at that time what was happening, right? So I talked to Todd Trout, the executive director there. I drove over. I said, Todd, I just want to rent your facility. I'm looking at the most vulnerable 100 students within the city of Buena Park, right? When we talk about brothers and sisters and trying to connect places for them to work, it wasn't happening, right? We had families that struggled, and I get teared up because I've heard of some of the conversations from my teachers, and you can't build relationships. You can do as much as you can, right? When you're in their homes on a teleprompter or an iPad, right? You build relationships as much as you can, but there are still some kids that just couldn't get there, and it wasn't their fault. So we had this partnership, and I walked the facility, and he says, no, we can do this. And then we started the bus kids there, right? And then we started to see these kids turn around. Then we started to see other community organizations saying, we want to partner with you guys, Vans, bottom all tennis shoes, right? We started to see others wanting to give to the most vulnerable students, and that partnership has continued to grow. We're now at about 300 students, right? Next year, we're going to be at 600, but we're bringing the Boys and Girls Club along with Cal State Fulton's ACES program after school. We're going to expand it with the Extended Learning Opportunities program, but we're going to provide a safe place where kids can connect that relationship beyond the school day, right? And so it's not just the hours that it's beyond the school day, and then provide additional services that we have to do, up with Care Solace and some of these other agencies that we have. The Korean Resource Center, which is a medical group that's in North Orange County there, is now wanting to partner, well, they have been partnering, but want a bigger involvement. Giving Children Hope as well, a nonprofit, wants to do more with us. So we have the resources there. It's about putting them all together and really making the system, this ecosystem, really work better in Buena Park.
So both times that Jeff and Ramon have now spoken, I've gotten teary-eyed because sometimes you just really don't reflect because you're just doing and you're in it. And everything that my brothers to the left have stated has really resonated because similarly, we launched learning labs precisely for the reason that Ramon mentioned, making sure that students had a safe place to learn and eat. I think we take that for granted. Like it's a luxury, right? Like you think about, like I receive 3 meals a day. So in Santa Ana, you're looking at a UPP, and I say this like free and reduced lunch rate, 89% of our students. And so those 3 meals a day were really critical, and that connection and that engagement during those learning labs to reignite that motivation for students to want to come back to school. And I think our teachers were working remote. We had our classified staff on the front lines supporting those efforts. Our after school program, we have the good fortune of being part of ACES and Assets grant funding. And then now we've served close to 12,000 students in our after school program. And they did amazing work running the learning labs while their teacher was zooming in and students were in the classroom. We were doing a hybrid model. We went 250 to 1 this year in counseling. So now we have we created this integrated coordinated care wellness hub on each of our school sites. We have that constitutes nurses, health clerks for the contact tracing. We'll never forget contact tracing during this decade. our extended learning partners, our family and community engagement partners on each of our school sites, and our school psychologists, really, and our social workers. We have 19 social workers right now that are doing a tremendous lift. And we're really looking at our data, our MTSS model, because we can actually pinpoint social emotional learning competencies and tie it to their academics. So it's not just about academic. You can't teach to an empty seat before, right? Now, if the seat's empty, we can zoom you in. And we can make that connection with the child. No more is the issues related to why a student needs to stay home. If they're on quarantine, we can put them in our virtual learning academy and connect and engage. Lice isn't an issue anymore. Like, we can connect you at home while you get your treatment done. It's really about, like, we've reinvented how we run our business in education. And I'm really proud of the work that Orange County has done, and I couldn't agree more. SCL was on the forefront in Orange County. I think the use of social workers, coming from a social work perspective, when I started 24 years ago, there were very few of us in education and very few being able to sit in this seat. And this is a privilege for me every day. And for our teachers, in regards to getting them prepared for reopening, because this is our first year back as a school district in person, it was really about, how do we better prepare our teachers to understand what may be coming, because we hadn't experienced that yet. So what was happening when the cameras were off, right? What are the behaviors we're going to see in the classroom? What is the mindset our teachers needed to have upon return? Because it needed to be one of empathetic understanding and support. And then how do you refer a student? How expeditious can we follow that process? So that way those students, our students receive the services that they need at the time that they need them, instead of awaiting a fail model that education has been set up on. And I really applaud the efforts of our team, because we were able to create a wellness playbook. It looks like some Google site, but literally there's chapters, there's lessons, and it was a full week of professional development to our teachers and our support staff on the impacts of COVID, trauma, risk assessment, suicide assessment, threat assessment, making sure that they understood the protocols and received the training. We have close to 6,000 professionals. I could say all 6,000 received the training. We have our data systems, right? We have PBIS, we have our restorative practices support approach. There's an entrenchment of social emotional wellness within our district. And it stems from just that motivation and of care and concern and creating those communities in the classroom.
Wasn't planning on doing this, but I just want to say thank you. I mean, from the hotlines to the hotspots to the way that you have showed up for our kids and given your heart. I mean, I want to honor our leaders, our teachers, and our staff that have done this. Thank you. We see you and we appreciate you. And our kids do too. And that means a lot to a parent. So I love the stories that you shared of our community showing up with this, right? Because we've talked about that need for safety nets and for not, we all have gaps, but having those layers to protect our kids. I wonder, does anyone have a story they want to share of maybe a community partner that showed up in the way that we're modeling working with the community? Yeah, so Dr. Yamas.
One immediately popped up. So we partner with Project Hope Alliance.
Okay.
And during the Christmas break, I had been told by our nutritious services team that there was going to be a week that we may not be able to deliver meals to our community. We usually are open during our intercession, during our winter months. So, and it was a new partner to us in Santa Ana. And I was on a Zoom call with Jennifer, friend, who's with Project Hope Alliance, and Tracy Carmichael. They're executive directors and COO, and I just was telling them why my heart was heavy. Sorry. Because I kept thinking about where were my kids going to be able to eat. So then they mobilized the whole team, and then Goodwill, and then Bracken Chicken. Like, we had hot food, we had delivery of food to our families, and we had close to 6,000 people that were coming through during that week of deliveries for our families. And that just immediately popped up in my head.
Yeah.
So I'm just
Yeah.
very fortunate because community partners, hands down, have just supported our efforts.
We've had the opportunity, also the pleasure of being able to have so many resources in Fullerton that have worked with us. When it first happened, you know, people don't think about the kitchen staff not being able to put together meals, because normally you'll put together meals, people will come pick them up. And we had the drive up service where they come and pick up breakfast and lunch and supper. But for a period of time, when you're trying to get your kitchen set up because of COVID standards, you can't have everyone working together. And so what was happening is your kitchen couldn't cook, your staff couldn't cook because they couldn't be together. So you had to partner with restaurants, you had to partner with places that would help you get barbecues. We had to buy barbecues in order to go to campuses to be able to cook on campus, and then be able to feed the students as they come in. So our partnerships with our local restaurants, our partnerships with OC United, our partnerships with the churches, with Solidarity, with the Cal State Fullerton. I mean, the list goes on, because I believe that when this happened, everybody said, how can we help? Our superintendent was on the school site every day handing out meals. He made sure that he was there every lunchtime to hand out meals to students and families as they drove up. We were all out there donning our masks and our gloves and talking to families as they pulled up, providing them with the resources that they needed in order to log on and to be able to do that. So I think it was just everyone pulling together. With these kinds of crises, your people come together, and I think that they bond, and I'm sure that that's what happened in every school site, every district. You know, I think statewide, your staff bonded during this time, because they had to spend a lot of time together coming up with how are we going to address these situations. For Fullerton, we were down for a day, but we were fortunate because most of our students had already had laptops, they had already had devices. We were a district who was already there. So for us, that was the easy part. It was the hard part is getting our staff on board and understanding that, you know, these kids are going through the trauma and going back to ACEs and going back to, you know, what are they dealing with? And you've got to you've got to give everyone grace. And I think that making sure our staff took care of themselves. And I think that's what people forget, is that teaching is very hard right now. It's always been hard. It's harder now because I was on an airplane, you know, past couple of days, and I was watching the steward, you know, the flight attendant, when they're talking about their oxygen mask. And we have to remind our staff that they need to take care of themselves first. They need to put their own oxygen mask on first before they can put on the oxygen mask of their students, because you have to be strong. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of everybody else. And as a board member, I have to remind our cabinet, our staff, who are doing a phenomenal job. I give all of you guys credit, because you are down, you know, you're there, you know, we're there with you as board members, but you guys are doing all that hard work. And you need to take care of yourself in addition to taking care of all the kids. So I do want to add that, so make sure you do.
Absolutely. Jeff, you want to jump in?
I'd like to just follow up on something that Bev mentioned, and that is really faith community participation in support Ramon and I had worked with Saddleback Church, and I know the Jane Temple you mentioned that had tremendous amount of support for students in your district. Many of you know that Saddleback Church fed thousands of families through COVID. And one other I'll mention is that the alternative education programs at Orange County Department of Education, while I was there, faced what many schools faced, especially in 2021 with graduations. I mean, how are you going to pull off a graduation with this? Mariners Church offered their parking lot, massive parking lot, and they purchased 2 huge screens. I mean, screens of this size, side by side. And we did 7 graduations in the parking lot with families sitting in their cars doing graduation on screen. That was completely without cost to the schools or the programs. But it was members of the community, and in this case, the faith community, who stepped up to support our public schools during a time of crisis that had a huge impact.
I do want to give credit, give us, that was the one organization, when you said it popped up in my mind, was Saddleback Church. We had a plethora of community organizations, but I did have lunch with the Mariners. Was it Mariners? No, at Saddleback. What? No, was that Mariners? Dr. Maharis invited some superintendents to have lunch, and in the conversation, they were asking us, what can we do for you? Right? Bev, you had mentioned something, if you can't take care of yourself, like, what are we doing for ourselves? I'm very lucky that I've got my family, right, and my faith, right? I'm an alumni of Vanguard University. Yeah, I graduated in 91 here many years ago. I had 3 children. My wife went through here, so I'm very proud of the university and what they've done over the years. But when I was talking to Saddleback about what can we do for you, we already had other systems in place for the families, but I really wanted to take care of our staff. Because, you know, without having that connection, they were already, like everybody says, I'm zoomed out, right? So how do we let our staff know that they're appreciated? They came out a couple of times with gift baskets and goodie things that we just delivered, saying, you know, from a goodie basket to the school sites, just thanking them to make sure that they were okay. And then we asked if there was a hotline they could tap into in case they needed something as well. So it was important for us.
That's great. I love hearing these stories of our community showing up with the resources that they had, right? And I think that's something we've discussed throughout these last 2 days, is the way we begin to start to help is just showing up, being present, offering the skills, the resources, the experiences we have, and offering those up, you know? And so whether it's the trafficking survivor or an organization serving them, or schools with vulnerable kids, that's how we do it. So thank you for that. I want to switch a little bit and ask about the issue of digital safety, because yes, all of our kids were on tablets these last years, right? And we've got one-to-one iPads, and we've been talking about the risks of social media, online predators, pornography. So what is the role of the public school in teaching our kids about safety and being smart digital citizens? So yeah, you want to start?
Bev, do you want to start? Yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Well, you've got my notes here. So I think with digital safety, schools can't do it alone. Schools have a responsibility, but I always go back to as parents and as community, we also have the responsibility of making sure our kids are safe. And it's scary out there. Who would have thought now, you know, in days like this, that you have things like the dark web and you have things that you really need to worry about. So we can't do it alone. Schools can't do it alone. With the new, you know, with our new mental health or our new, what do we call it? Child health youth. Chila, you know, what caused all of the commotion, you know, people got all up in arms about the new health ed that came upon us as educators. One of the things that was added to that was human trafficking awareness. And what are we doing with our students in our schools to bring that up? So I think it goes back to giving our kids the responsibility and the education to feel comfortable in themselves, to feel confident, to understand what a healthy relationship looks like. It comes back to teaching our kids what healthy relationships look like, whether it's role modeled, whether you're learning it, whether you're getting it in school, going through the modules, again, all age appropriate, but giving the kids and being able to empower them with what that looks like. So now that your students know what that looks like, and they know what a healthy relationship looks like, and they know when I have internet, with our school district and most school districts that have digital are going to go through, and there's things that you have to do as the school district. If you take money from the state, you have to go through a whole series of lessons on how do you teach digital literacy, how do you teach what to look for, how to question what you read. Those things I think are happening in our schools, but it's outside of that is empowering your kids on logically you can do anything you want in school, but when your kids are out and they're looking at that site when they're at home or when they don't have a parent around is getting them to understand that I don't need to look at this. I know what to do. I know what unhealthiness looks like. And so I can stand up to that. But again, you can't do it alone. And I go back to my one story so I'm old, right, you guys? When I am old, I promise. When I was a PTA president at a junior high school, and internet was just coming in, and it was just when our students were starting to do the online games with other people that you didn't know who they were. Now it's, that's how they do it, right? They play games and that's how it is. But it was like that first couple years where it was so scary as a parent. We had a situation in Fullerton where we had a student who had gone online and was playing a game, and somebody friended her and said that, they were her age, and okay, they developed this relationship online, and it was happening after, at home. That student then was going to hook up with this person who was going to come and show up at the school the next day. She told somebody, she told a friend, and that friend had the bravery to tell their parent, hey, this is what's happening with my friend. And that parent then had the bravery and said, I'm not just going to sit back and let this happen. I'm going to call. Right. And so it takes all of us to do things like that. If you see something that doesn't look right, you say something. And we need our kids to feel comfortable in order to do that and to feel safe that that's okay. So they were able to do that. Police showed up. They found the guy actually showed up, right, to the school, right? They caught him. They arrested him. But then taking it one step further, as a parent that watched that and said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So we brought in when internet safety groups were out there, and you brought in the parent education. So we brought someone in to talk about it, to bring parents. And I was so disappointed because I had like 3 parents there. So it's really getting people to realize that this is not somewhere else. This is in our own backyard. These are people that are grooming our kids, and I, putting my other hat on, work for Crittenden, where I see our kids that are trafficked. I see our kids that are vulnerable youth, that, it's our most vulnerable kids. And it's not always, it's those kids that aren't getting what they need at home or what they think they need, or there's something missing, or their parents are working and they don't see it, and they don't pay attention to that really expensive pair of shoes. There's things that parents need to look at and they need to be able to do. Schools can do what they can do, but also parents need to take on responsibilities, and we need to know where our kids are, and you need to be that parent. I always tell people, be that parent, be there for them, be there for your kids, have conversations, don't get in their face because they're never going to be, they're not going to tell you, or make sure your kids have that trusting relationship where if something looks wrong on the internet, something doesn't feel right in their gut, that they say something, that there needs to be a trusting adult. And a lot of times our teachers are that. They've built those relationships. So, sometimes it could be an administrator, it could be a classified staff. It could be anyone on the school campus, the Girl Scout leader, someone's mom. But they need to feel comfortable with an adult and be able to say something. So we need to make sure our kids and our parents and everyone feel empowered to be able to do that.
Well, I'm excited to share next weekend, Fullerton School District has invited me to give the same talk on teaching parents about preventing sexual abuse. So hopefully more than 3 people show up for that, right? It's been a while. Yeah, yeah. Dr. Miramontes or Llamas, do you want to tell us more about how schools are teaching kids about these
So
safety issues?
I'll just add to
Mhm.
what
He likes your notes.
Okay. So in regards to what we're doing is in regards to what Beverly just mentioned as well, we have Go Guardian, who they actually are devices. Everyone's on tech nowadays. So it scans and it gives the opportunity for that teacher to also see what the students see on their dashboard. So like we were using it initially to just make sure students were focused and engaged in the classroom. But then it turned out like, okay, well, you're logging into something that you shouldn't be logging into, and then having conversations with students and parents immediately. Gaggle is also one of our screening tools that we utilize. So any type of written text or exchange on any of our Chromebook and devices, it services triggers for students that might be displaying suicidal ideation, as well as maybe engaging in inappropriate conversations. We have partnered with ASKIP, who's actually an insurance provider for many school districts. And we actually have co-authored curriculum with them in regards to protection in child sexual assault and molestation cases, really trying to ensure students, like, it's a go or a no-go. And it's called no-go curriculum because it's really primed to K-8 students and really building that youth voice. And I think both the judges mentioned, it's like, you really need to have students engaged in these processes and understand, like, it's a no-go. When you have that feeling in the gut or the pit of your stomach, like those trigger points, and understanding, like, is it safe or is it not safe? And they have this cute little skedaddle that they've like created with ASKIP, but it's really, we piloted it in 5 of our schools last spring online, and then we've brought it into our schools this year, and we've really been seeing a lot of changes in behavior, as well as the parent component. So you could do a student component, but you also need to make sure that parents are well aware and on board. And so parent information night goes out. They've also held specific training. So for our after school team, for our athletic directors, for our coaches, for our activity monitors, they really tell what active supervision is, like in person and online. And that's really critical because when you're looking at so many different points of contact that students have, like, they need to know immediately, like, who do I go to? Who's that safe person on my campus that I can speak to? And it really helps to empower. The other piece that we've done is a We Care Get Help initiative. It's the 6th year that we've had it within our district. It first started as a mental health initiative within our district, but it's really grown into something more so about creating communities of care on our campus and having those caring adults that you can go to. So,
Well, I'm mindful that we're pretty much out of time. So I'm going to ask you each for 1 minute, if you would just give us a closing thought on, you all have big jobs and a lot of responsibility. What would make your job easier so that all of our kids are ensured justice? Let's start with you, Jeff.
I'm going to refer to something that we haven't specifically called out, and that's student agency, the power of students to lead stuff and make stuff happen. And part of what we're looking for in the SEL is to recognize those assets and have an asset approach towards students. One quick example, a student named Rebecca Robeck, as an 8th grader in Newport Mesa, started a Let's Be Kind club. That club, she's a senior in high school now, is now in 19 schools, basically across the district. The city of Costa Mesa has adopted Let's Be Kind Day. This came from an 8th grader. So recognizing the power of student agency in the face of this kind of challenge.
Love it. Dr. Miramontes, how can we support you to do your job
I
well?
think you're doing it. I think just awareness, bringing people together, bringing all the players in a room. It's not a task that will be done overnight, but you continue to peel back the onion, you get to the middle.
Yes, and yes. I would say that we cannot do this work alone. We can't work in silos. I think that's one of the things that we learned from our pandemic. And we're still in the throes of it, but hopefully leveling off, right? But I think it's, if you are a community-based partner, if you're involved in an organization, reach out to your neighboring districts. I want to say, like, I know every single partner in Santa Ana, but I know there's millions of people and business partners, right? Really trying to build those relationships. I think it's been critical for all of us that, those community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, just continuing to maximize our dollars and resources to really spread the wealth throughout the cities that we serve. I think that would make all of our jobs a lot easier, I believe.
Echo what you guys are saying, because I guess it takes a community, it takes everyone working together. In Fullerton, we have started a Rising Stars program where our executive cabinet, along with community members, all volunteer their time to mentor students that are at risk. And so we have a group of kids that come in that need that little bit of extra help. And so we have reached out to the community, as well as our superintendent, assistant superintendents, classified staff, anyone that you can think of, the new gentleman that owns the Ford dealership down the street. It's anybody who feels like they want to give to a student that needs it. That's where it comes in. It's everyone needs to step up and help our kids succeed. It's hard being a student. It's hard being a kid, looking at everything that's going on right now. It's our parents are having, they're struggling. So it does take a community. It takes everybody to work together to make it happen. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Do we have time for any questions? I wasn't. 5 more minutes? Okay, let's see what we got. Okay, there was a question for Dr. Ramon Miramontes. What did you do to create a safe place for students to study during COVID? You mentioned that. Is this the type of programs we could use to keep kids off of the streets or out of jail? Is the question.
I honestly think it is. It is an opportunity to do so. So as I mentioned before, the Boys and Girls Club did partner with Buena Park. And then we have the after-school program with Cal State Fullerton for many of our students. And we're going to expand both those programs in the coming years. So nearly 50% of our students at each school site will have a place to go to.
That's great. For those of us who may be joining online, that was a parent from the community thanking Dr. Ramon for his courageous, innovative work. Thank you. We've got a minute if anyone wants to add any questions. I'm refreshing. I don't know if students are typing questions or if anybody wants to raise their hand in the room. Any others? Well, I think we talked through all of them, right? Thank you so much for just bearing your hearts, being real, sharing a little bit of, I'm sure, a much bigger struggle that you have been through and the way that you've loved and cared for our kids and our community. We are grateful. Thanks for joining us.